Pop culture, whether it be famous actors, musicians, or athletes, has a way of ingraining memories into our brain that could last a lifetime. One mention of a song, a specific movie, or even a certain toy can ignite nostalgic thoughts in our minds that brings us back to our childhood. But what really goes on for some of these icons who provide us with these lifelong impressions in our memory bank long after their time in the spotlight? Many drift into obscurity, never to be heard from again, until a tragic event occurs in their life. With the creation of the internet and the rise in popularity of social media, many of these stars have resurfaced and piqued our interest once again. One question we always want to know is, what happened after they faded away from the spotlight, and what do they look like now? One WWF superstar who reached the peak of his career in the mid-1980s and resurfaced as the inception of shoot interviews became popular with fans is Billy Jack Haynes. Standing 6'3" and weighing over 250 pounds, Billy Jack had a superhero build and imposing look. At the height of his career, he wrestled in front of 93,000 fans against Hercules at WrestleMania 3. But that's not where his story in the public eye ends. In the last 2 decades, Billy Jack would appear in several shoot-style interviews, some of which he would talk about multiple conspiracy theories and even admit to being involved in unsolved murders.
Okay, listen please. It's been 3 months. Now the tape was never played.
What time I have left on this earth, you're probably going to be looking at a dead man, 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 dead man.
Former professional wrestler and Portland local William Haynes Jr., known in the ring as Billy Jack Haynes, is headed to jail. He's accused of killing his wife, 84-year-old Jeanette Beecraft. Haynes was previously held at a local hospital where he was treated for injuries unrelated to the crime. He now faces charges of second-degree murder and unlawful use of a weapon.
Born William Albert Haynes on July 10, 1953 in Portland, Oregon. For most of Billy's younger years, he had a stable childhood, but a string of abuse by his mother's sister's husband would leave Billy with a deep dark secret at a young age. He started off training in boxing as early as 10 years old. At 15, he was 6'1", 175 pounds, and a light heavyweight with several amateur fights. But tragedy would soon strike, as his uncle, his father's brother, was in a fatal accident. 3 weeks later, his mom died as well. At that point in his life, he made a decision to look after his father and made him a priority for the rest of his life. After breaking his right hand in the boxing ring in 1977, it left him few options. He had already served 6 months in the army, but went AWOL when he found out his dad was sick and lost his eyesight to diabetes. Now working as a janitor, making $6 an hour, life wasn't the same. Billy was a lifelong wrestling fan. In early 1982, he went down to a Portland wrestling show to try and figure out how he was going to get his foot in the door. Although he did get the attention of promoter Don Owen, Don sent him to Calgary to train with Stu Hart. Billy took his last $200, filled his car up with gas, and drove to Calgary to chase his dream. He started training in Stu Hart's dungeon. According to CageMatch.net, his first recorded match was August 10, 1982 in Stampede Wrestling, and according to Billy, he was making around $25 a match. He would eventually become good friends with the Dynamite Kid, who took him under his wing. By fall of that year, he debuted in Portland Wrestling, immediately headlining cards and now making $1,000 to $1,500 a week. Simply known as Bill Haynes, he would later take on the moniker Billy Jack, and would later add his last name after legal threats by actor Tom Laughlin, who starred in the original Billy Jack movie. In 1983, he got married to female wrestler Jeannie Clark, who was also known as Lady Blossom, but they would split the following year. By 1984, feeling like his character was getting stale in the Pacific Northwest, he made his move to Florida Championship Wrestling, hoping to gain more experience, but more importantly to make more money. By November of that year, Billy would make his WWF debut against Jerry Valiant in Chicago, Illinois. After the match, Billy would get word from home that his dad had a stroke. Without hesitating, he immediately flew home to his dad and was fired by the WWF. In 1986, Billy won the Pacific Northwest heavyweight title from Bobby Jaggers, but behind the scenes, his appetite for Percocet and Vicodin was growing.
I said about a year ago I didn't know if I was going to retire or what. I've been training for 3 months, and I know you can hear me out there.
In May of 1996, Billy was contacted by WWF booker George Scott, and they were interested in giving him a second chance. After defeating Moondog Moretti in his farewell match on May 10th, Billy left Portland for New York, determined to take full advantage of the second chance. His first match in the Federation was against Frank Marconi on June 1st. Billy was now making between $8,000 to $10,000 per week, more money than he had ever made in his life. But almost immediately, he was finding it hard to keep up with the travel schedule, and his drug use became more rampant. Backstage, he was known for his quick temper and contrasting, soft-spoken demeanor. On March 27, 1987, the WWF would hold its annual extravaganza, WrestleMania. Its home that year, the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit, Michigan, in front of 93,000 fans. Billy would face Hercules in a Battle of the Full Nelson match. During a spot on the outside of the ring, the plan was Hercules would bust Billy open with his chain while scuffling outside the ring, but Billy was caught on camera pulling the razor blade out of his wrist tape. Despite the blunder, and although the match ended in a disappointing double countout, Billy's stock in the wrestling business had just risen dramatically. Injuries were piling up, and life on the road was taking its toll, both mentally and physically. By January, Billy was mostly involved in tag team matches, teaming up with Ken Patera, mostly putting over younger talent and newer teams, including Demolition. The circumstances surrounding Haynes' exit from the WWF in January '88 have sparked controversy, fueled by the evolving narrative as Billy recounted it over time. According to one account, when the WWF was coming through Portland, they wanted him to lose once again, but not wanting to come up short in his hometown, in front of his family and friends and beloved father, instead of being pinned in front of everyone, Billy decided to stay home and no-show the event. The WWF left Portland the following day. Billy Jack didn't. According to Greg Valentine, Billy took a substance called GHB on an airplane, and after passing out and beginning to drool out of the side of his mouth, the stewardess sought medical attention and had the pilot make an emergency landing. The incident got back to Vince, and Billy was fired. Billy was burnt out and needed time off. He had been going non-stop since he joined the Federation less than 2 years prior. But he did attempt to invest his money. Not only did he pay for his father's house, in September of 1987, he had opened his own gym. And in 1988, he began promoting his own shows under the Oregon Wrestling Federation banner, in direct competition with Don Owen. He had done what most men only dream of, hit the big time hard enough to make enough money to get out sooner than later. Billy consistently voiced his criticism of his rival, the Owen promotion. Even though he had recruited several of his old friends from Owen, after hiring big names and only producing mediocre shows, Billy was soon spending over $5,000 every week of his own money. According to a report published by Willamette Wee, Haynes' fundamental strategy followed the traditional wrestling format. He would put on shows 6 days a week, primarily in inexpensive venues such as National Guard armories and high school gymnasiums across the state. They would also participate in charity events and county fairs. The pivotal Saturday event would occur in Oregon City, the OWF's hometown, at an arena conveniently situated near Billy Jack's gym. He secured a contract with KPDX Channel 44 to produce and broadcast his program. This particular show would be televised, serving as the primary advertising platform for the other 6 weekly events. However, what truly set Haynes' organization apart from all others was the caliber of its wrestlers. Drawing from his own experience, Haynes understood which incentives would entice talented, skilled performers to leave their current pursuits and journey to Oregon. When Billy Jack initiated his long-distance phone recruiting campaign, he dangled the irresistible bait of exceptionally high pay by regional standards. guarantees ranging from $800 to $1,000 per week. He also assured them of transportation, providing 2 chauffeured vans, one for the heroes and one for the villains. Wrestlers would receive a portion of the profits from merchandise such as posters, t-shirts, and even action figures based on their in-ring personas. Additionally, there would be extensive TV coverage, ample advertising, and every safety precaution available for ring work. Billy's summons attracted over a dozen wrestlers and a top-tier referee. Notable names like Portland's Kip the Crippler Oliver, Coco Samoa, Brian Adams, Mean Mike Miller, Moondog Moretti, and Gorgeous Joey Jackson relinquished stable positions with Don Owen Promotions. Others hailed from various states such as North Carolina, Florida, California, Tennessee, Missouri, and New York, with some relocating their families over vast distances. Some even abandoned lucrative careers outside of wrestling to heed Haynes' call. Mr. Magnificent, Kevin Kelly, a prominent figure in the Midwestern circuit, entrusted his Minneapolis car dealership to a manager and promptly flew to Portland upon receiving Billy Jack's invitation. By March and early April, the OWF started revealing cracks in its foundation. When Billy's business partner Kaplan requested a contract, Haynes declined. Even before Haynes' inaugural wrestling event, Kaplan withdrew from the venture, claiming to have taken with him over $100,000 worth of potential investors. Upon the wrestlers' arrival, Haynes requested that they work for half the guaranteed money, stating it was temporary until the promotion gets off the ground. Even at half pay, it exceeded what many of them had been earning in their prior territories. Following months of meticulous preparation, the highly anticipated OWF kickoff took place on Saturday night, May 7th, at the 2,000-seat Oregon City Civic Center. The OWF debut drew an audience of 1,800 people, but their attendance declined significantly thereafter. Only 550 showed up the following Saturday. While the Saturday night shows typically attracted between 300 and 600 ticket buyers, attendance for the other 6 nights either failed to materialize or rapidly dwindled. The shows during the week regularly drew crowds under 50. OWF performers began standing on street corners, handing out flyers in small Oregon towns. JT, Rock and Roll Southern, would comment, "I was completely humiliated. It was like we were begging people to come and see us wrestle. We would arrive in a town and nobody would know we were coming. There were no posters, no ads, no radio spots. Do you know what it's like to wrestle in front of 30 people? The worst feeling in the world is when you're in the dressing room lacing up your boots and you know there's only 30 people out there. But you've got to get up for it. They've paid their money and they deserve a show. You say, 'Oh Lord, let me get through this night.'" Initially in the main event of each card, Billy Jack eventually ceased to make appearances altogether in the road shows, wrestling solely on Saturday nights in Oregon City. "Billy let himself go," said wrestler Brian Adams. "His hair was a mess, he didn't shower, he was in the worst shape of his life. He didn't even bother to put his teeth in anymore." When Billy's expectations of through-the-roof ticket sales didn't get off the ground, he started shorting the wrestlers on payouts. "I was getting $400, explained Coco Samoa. Then one week he gave me $300 and told me he'd make up the difference the next week. The next week he'd give me $200 and say he'd make it all up in the next check. But the next week it was down $150. For the first time in his 18-year wrestling career, he didn't have enough to pay his own rent. Payments were also lagging behind on utility and equipment bills, as well as the lease for the Oregon City Arena. The stress was wreaking havoc on Billy's sleep. Most of the original crew, including a referee, had already departed, resorting to borrowing money or selling and pawning belongings to fund their departure from Oregon. Billy surprised the remaining crew when he informed a local newspaper that the departing wrestlers had been released due to failing drug tests. On Friday, July 15th, the already strained relationship between Billy Jack and his team reached a breaking point. After receiving their $150 paychecks, all the wrestlers insisted on a meeting with Billy. Following 2 disastrous and badly arranged shows, the Oregon Boxing and Wrestling Commission refused to issue any more permits or licenses to Oregon Wrestling Federation. It was over. The venture had lasted less than 3 months. During the first days and weeks after the closure of OWF, a flood of enraged wrestlers and creditors, Billy hid out at a secret location and ignored all of his phone calls. He would eventually come out of hiding and issue the following statement. I was a promoter, and it was my responsibility to make sure things got done. I didn't do it. I've lost my dream, and I feel lower than a midget. I thought I was cut out to be a promoter, but I was wrong. I'm not a big enough prick. So after only a few months, he was down over $1 million and the promotion folded. At the same time, his gym also shut down. He had no choice but to go back to work for Don Owen. By the end of 1988, both his savings account and his list of friends had shrunk to almost nothing. Due to stress and a lack of exercise, he was in the worst physical shape he had ever been in before. He had a dozen creditors threatening lawsuits and was on the brink of bankruptcy. Billy would spend some time in Japan, but within a year, he was back in Portland working for Don Owen. By 1990, things would start looking up. Billy would debut in Herb Abrams' UWF, and in early 1991 would land a deal with WCW, appearing under a mask as Black Blood. According to Billy, after helping train Bryan Adams and helping him get into Portland wrestling, and then again help him to get into the WWF, Bryan gave him no respect. Bryan and an unnamed individual would contact Billy and inform him the WWF was in Texas and Billy had a tryout. Billy drove all the way from Portland to Texas, only to find out he had been ribbed. In 1993, Billy's beloved father passed away after months of watching his dad suffering and some nights screaming in pain. It was almost a blessing in disguise. But the void left in Billy's life would be impossible to fill. He would spend the next few years spiraling out of control, completely broke, but being recognized everywhere he went didn't help matters. He would bounce around throughout various territories until his official retirement from wrestling in early 1996. Directly after that, he went to host a short-lived radio show. By 1998, Billy was penniless, and for better or worse, still recognized everywhere he went. By September 2001, he would travel to every hospital and clinic in Oregon and lie to the nurses and doctors for the pain pill Vicodin. But the police were onto him, and he was soon arrested and charged. In 2002, now on federal probation, Billy made an attempt to change his life. He quit using drugs with the use of methadone, and his life was starting to finally feel normal. He admitted that his biggest fear in life was being a celebrity and people finding out he was a drug addict. In 2006, Billy ended up in a hospital when he was attacked outside a body shop in Portland. This was due to Billy allegedly skimming off the top while being a mule in a marijuana smuggling operation years ago after finding out he was being underpaid and lied to. Unbeknownst to him, he was transporting cocaine, not marijuana. According to Billy, he was beaten within an inch of his life. In 2014, Billy Jack Haynes sued the WWE, claiming he contracted hepatitis C during a bloody WWF wrestling match. Also claiming the WWE went out of its way to put wrestlers in danger by encouraging steroid and cocaine use and hiding important medical information from wrestlers. At the time, he was demanding more than $5 million. In a 2017 interview, Jim Cornette would state, "Billy Jack was a different type of guy. I always thought he was a pleasant man to be around and never had a problem with him." He would also state, "Billy had somewhat of a temper, and as the story goes, he had killed a guy by knocking him down with a goofy punch and gotten into trouble over it, and as a result always tried to keep his temper in check. He was very soft-spoken and very calm guy in the locker room, but when he came into Dallas, there was an issue between him and Chris Adams. I believe in Portland they had wrestled together previously, where Chris ended up with the lady that Billy Jack had had before. When Billy debuted in Dallas for World Class, they booked him in Dallas and Chris left town for a week rather than have the match. I always enjoy my conversations with Billy Jack and never had a problem with him in the world, and I would prefer not piss him off for anything." Billy later on would claim he had been witness to a high-profile unsolved case referred to as the Boys on the Tracks, which took place in August of 1987 and involved a high-profile politician. He even went as far as to meet with the mother of one of the victims and a private investigator working the case. ProWrestling.net does say Haynes is not listed as having worked for the WWF live events for the night in question. He also worked a couple nights later at a taping in San Francisco, which would be an airtight alibi for where he wasn't. On August 27, 1987, the bodies of 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives were hit by a cargo train in Alexander, Arkansas, as they lay on the tracks. Dan Harmon, a prosecutor of the case who was later arrested for dealing drugs, is one person implicated in the murder. In January of 2018, Billy Jack Haynes came forward on the Doc Washburn show, claiming to have been involved in the drug business and a witness to the murders, and even videotaped them. According to the head investigator who was working the case, Billy Jack Haynes took a lie detector test and it came back inconclusive because at the time, Billy had some health issues affecting the test. But it was taken into account Billy would essentially be risking his freedom and possibly his life by coming forward, and knew some of the people directly involved. 3 law enforcement officers, 2 attorneys/politicians, and a bouncer for a local nightclub. He also named the governor as having directed the events of the night. Not only does the investigator believe his story, he believes he was there during the night the boys were murdered. In 2018, he had a meeting with Gene Duffy, who was head of the task force for the law enforcement community in Arkansas. According to the detective's homepage, he stated in his comments, Billy Jack Haynes got up to walk out of his first and last meeting with Gene Duffy after she insulted him when he tried to answer Duffy's question. What happened on the tracks when the boys were murdered? Billy Jack started telling Duffy his life story. To put context into his life leading to Kevin and Don's murders, when Billy Jack began his story, he mentioned his blind dad. Gene Duffy rudely said, "I don't care about your blind dad. I want to know about the boys' murders." The statement really upset Billy. His father was his hero. Without answering any further questions, Billy walked out before the interview was over. The case still remains unsolved. That was the story of Billy Jack Haynes.